Steam Next Fest returns, bringing thousands of new demos to fall into. With so many tricks and treats to pass, you might be wondering which ones are worth your attention now and maybe your money when they hit a full release. In another round of rapid-fire recommendations, I'm highlighting some fresh new ideas alongside a few familiar favourites. As before, I'm focusing on cozy thrills for your Macintosh or Steam Deck, two platforms that could use a little extra warmth this time of year. So without further delay, here are my top picks from October's showcase. I'm starting things off with a slightly bold pick because this isn't a Next Fest demo, but a full release that dropped just this past week. I'm not entirely sure what Publisher.mu's demo plans are, but for now I think this one deserves a small spotlight. Absolum immediately caught my attention, a high fantasy brawler in the spirit of Capcom's classic Dungeons & Dragons arcade games, blended with the roguelite structure of Hades. That mix alone had me intrigued, especially paired with its gorgeous hand-drawn art style, and once I saw a few trusted voices singing its praises, I knew I had to dive in myself. Now, about 8 hours later, after multiple successful runs and plenty of treasure still waiting to be unearthed, I can safely say I'm feeling pretty good about Absolum overall. I should say up front, I'm not a die-hard brawler aficionado, and players seeking a punishing new challenge in the genre might find Absolum a little too approachable. In many ways, it really is the Hades of beat-em-ups, just as that game softened the rough edges of action RPGs and roguelikes, letting players make steady permanent progress across runs and treating randomness as a remix tool rather than a punishment. Absolum follows that same path. Each run gives you randomized boons that enhance your basic attacks, specials, dashes, and breakers. The skill floor stays comfortably low, making it easy for anyone to jump in before dazzling you with its array of toys and abilities. You might reach a point where your luck runs out and you're sent back to the beginning of a run, but again, that steady progress at least means you'll get a little bit further next time. Honestly, I appreciate that. It's been a while since something has filled the same accessibility niche that Petal Crash once did. That's not to say that Absolum is a pushover. Its real satisfaction comes from gradually mastering the combat's finer details, making each return trip feel earned rather than repetitive, just like the best games with roguish elements pull off. Taking the Hades route is a clever twist, and one that makes perfect sense. The developers had already prototyped similar ideas back in their previous title Streets of Rage 4. Set against Absolum's world of high fantasy, that dungeon-crawling roguelike flavour feels right at home, and it's a world that I've grown quite fond of. Sure, it leans on familiar fantasy tropes, manic goblins, stone-faced dwarves, swamp-dwelling lizard folk, even the occasional cosmic horror, but everything crackles with this fizzy sense of adventure that makes the cliches feel fresh. The main cast helps a lot with that, both in personality and playstyle. There's Galandra, the all-rounder sword fighter, Carl, a fast-hitting dwarf who literally brings a gun to a sword fight, and Brome, a frog wizard straight out of the Animals with Attitude era. His dash animation even has him surfing on his staff. And then there's maybe my personal favourite, Cider. And yeah, maybe I'm biased by the name, but her prosthetic limbs give her a unique grapple-heavy, almost ninja-like moveset that's a blast to use. There's genuinely something for everyone here, especially since the game supports both local and online two-player co-op, just like the arcade classics it draws from. Visually and sonically, Absolum absolutely shines. It runs beautifully on Steam Deck, which feels like the perfect home for its short, punchy runs and long-term upgrading structure. And really, that's my biggest takeaway. It's taken the classic beat-em-up formula and, instead of obsessing over making it a hardcore fans-only gauntlet, it's asked how the genre could diversify. By blending in roguelike elements, it's made something with genuine mass appeal, without at all sacrificing an artistic vision. As someone who bounced off Final Fight and Double Dragon in the past, but loved Hades, Absolum clicked with me immediately. If you've been on the fence because of its brawler roots, I heartily recommend giving it a try. You can even fine-tune the experience in the assist menu, whether you want to soften the blows or crank up the challenge. But even without those tweaks, the base game offers plenty of thrilling adventure, one you'll want to return to again and again. If you're in the mood for a free demo that lets you throw a few punches like Absolum, then I've got to recommend Marvel's Cosmic Invasion. I do feel a bit cheeky following up a paid indie highlight with something tied to the biggest media franchise on Earth, but honestly, this one earns its spot. Far from being a simple cash-in, it stands tall alongside the great superhero brawlers of old. And well, it also stars my good friend She-Hulk and Rocket Raccoon. This one comes from Tribute Games, the studio behind Flint Hook, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Shredder's Revenge, and before that, back in their Ubisoft days, the criminally underrated GBA TMNT game, and the cult classic Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Tribute has always had a knack for handling both brawlers and beloved properties with care, distilling what makes them special and amplifying it through sharp design and style. From the first frame of Cosmic Invasion, that signature flair for pixel art is front and center. It's got the punchy energy of Capcom's late 90s sprites, but with a modern touch. Cleaner lines, a simplified rendering, bolder colors, and incredible legibility. You could say it looks like the comics come to life, but honestly, it might look better than what Marvel's currently publishing. The animation is especially delightful, expressive, full of character, and loaded with small details. Rocket's oversized space guns, for instance, jingle with loose ammos and blinking lights. A joy for me, and likely the animators who got to work on it. As expected, it runs buttery smooth on Steam Deck, and I can easily see it becoming a solid couch co-op pick. Just hook your Deco to the TV, grab a second controller, and you're set for a night of cosmic brawling. Gameplay-wise, it goes down smoothly. While it shares some DNA with Absolum in its brawler foundation, Cosmic Invasion sticks closer to the traditional linear format, layering on deeper combo systems and technical flourishes that seasoned genre fans will appreciate. I'm not exactly a brawler purist myself, but the two demo levels left me pretty satisfied. The pacing is tight, the enemy variety keeps you moving, and the boss fights hit that sweet spot between flashy and fair. Environmental twists like collapsing platform, shifting hazards, and interactive stage elements add just enough spice to keep things interesting. It's the kind of game where you can feel the developer's enthusiasm radiating through every punch, kick, and body slam, and that passion makes all the difference. If the full game keeps up this level of polish, it'll easily be worth the asking price just to see what inventive ideas and wild Marvel locales the team has in store. I wouldn't call it a throwback to Marvel's superheroes or X-Men Children of the Atom because, like Shredder's Revenge before it, Cosmic Invasion isn't just reliving the past, it's confidently carving out its own space in it. Another throwback, this time to a genre that's usually a bit intense for my taste, but a take that's absolutely dripping with style, is BIRDCAGE. This one came highly recommended from a few trusted confidants, and I can now understand why. Vertical shoot-em-ups have always been built for spectacle. Think of later-era cave titles that transform the simple act of flying and shooting into a reactive dance of dodging neon curtains of bullets, testing not your trigger finger so much as your ability to thread a pixel-sized hitbox through chaos. BIRDCAGE takes that energy and fuses it with an impressive grab bag of classic mechanics. You play as a vat-grown pilot caught in a holy war between two rival sects of spacefaring humanity, tasked with destroying a doomsday weapon known only as the World Egg. And naturally, the only way to do that is how these games have always done it, by strapping into a cutting-edge starfighter and unloading a million bullets into endless waves of enemies. Despite commanding what's technically a spaceship, your craft also wields a beam sword that can sweep across the screen, absorbing enemy laser fire of the same color to charge up a devastating counterattack. It's a clear homage to Treasure's classics then, Ikaruga's polarity switch and elegance, and Radiant Silvergun's layered weapon mastery. But what really makes BIRDCAGE soar is its presentation. It's been painstakingly crafted to feel like the coolest cult video game that could have come out in 1999. The interface pulses with Serial Experiments Lane-style kinetic typography, codec-style cut-ins echo Metal Gear Solid with Shinkara-esque green-tinted sketches, and the soundtrack blends orchestral swells with techno straight from the PS1's golden era. Even the story feels delightfully lost in translation, packed with cryptic, vaguely religious terminology and capitalized weapon names that sound cool at first and might make sense later. Visually, it absolutely nails the late PS1 aesthetic too. Simple polygonal models layered with richly detailed, almost pixel art-like textures. It's a hard look to find in 2025 and feels so authentic here it could have been lifted off a forgotten demo disc. As expected, with a somewhat low poly approach and focus on high reaction times, it's going to run pretty well on anything, and certainly did when tested on the Steam Deck. I'll admit, I probably connected more with BIRDCAGE's visual flair than its gameplay. As I'm sure the footage will betray, I spent a fair bit of time eating laser fire, even on easy mode. So take my impressions with a grain of salt, I'm probably not the most seasoned pilot for this kind of assault. That said, I still came away impressed by how cohesively it all clicks. There's a real rhythm to the interplay of shooting, sword swinging, dodging, and energy management. It's a ballet of motion as much as a bullet hell. Whether BIRDCAGE ultimately stands shoulder to shoulder with a genre greats or ends up more of a lovingly crafted tribute, it's hard to say yet. But on sheer vibes alone, it's absolutely worth your attention. It captures that late 90s fusion of mecha melodrama, mysticism, and maximalist design so perfectly, it feels like an artifact from a parallel timeline. A distilled shot of PS1 era ambition, polished to a radiant shine. If Marvel's Cosmic Invasion feels like a modern revival of the classic arcade brawler and Project BIRDCAGE feels like a lost treasure tribute for the PS1, then Petal Crash 2 does something similar for the late SNES era block action puzzle games like Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo and Panel to Pawn. It's a genre that doesn't demand fast-moving graphics, which gives the art room to shine, and shine it certainly does. At first glance, you might even mistake Petal Crash 2 for a newly translated Japanese PlayStation import. Credit where it's due to developers Friend and Fairy then. They've nailed the hallmarks of that era, not just visually but tonally, right down to the charming character archetypes and ostentatious presentation. As the number in the title suggests, this is a follow-up to 2020's Petal Crash, a smaller project with an aesthetic that leaned more towards the Game Boy Color's bright simplicity, a good fit for an early indie release. 5 years later, the sequel blooms into something far more polished and confident, both in art and gameplay. So what's it like to play? It's Tetris Attack with a twist. You're working on a grid of coloured blocks that don't drop from above but instead sprout from empty spaces. To clear them, you can't just line them up, you have to flick one block directly into another of the same colour to destroy them. That single mechanic opens up some brilliant combo potential. Larger clusters explode with a chain reaction that sends nearby blocks flying, setting off cascading clears if you plan ahead. I'll admit I'm not quite the type to think 6 moves ahead, but even my modest 2-block combos felt satisfyingly snappy and kinetic. The demo offers 2 main modes, a score-chasing time trial and a classic versus setup. In the latter, you battle an opponent, AI or another player, by chaining combos to flood their screen with extra blocks. There's even a little tug-of-war meter along the bottom to show who's winning, though I was usually too deep in a block-breaking chaos to pay much attention to it. If you're playing on Steam Deck and want something that feels like a lost gem from the Panel to Pawn or Puyo Puyo era, without fiddling with emulators, Petal Crash 2 fits that niche quite nicely. It's retro in spirit, modern in execution, and absolutely brimming with block-busting personality. From the reliably offbeat publishers Devolver Digital comes another long-gestating auteur project, Skate Story, a game that asks what if Tony Hawk's Pro Skater were a piece of art. Much like how EA Skate once reimagined the genre through grounded physics, reworked controls, and lo-fi fish-eyed camera work, Skate Story pushes that realism into the surreal. You play as a fragile being made entirely of glass, light refracting through your body in waves of chromatic distortion. Every environment around you hums with static and digital noise, blacked out voids punctuated by dreamlike neon skylines and distant city silhouettes. The few NPCs you encounter appear as uncanny sculptures, marble busts, cracked statues, and eerie lawn ornaments. It's a mythological take on the subject matter then, appropriately epic in the literary sense rather than the cool skateboarder lingo. Running on Steam Deck, the game performs remarkably well. The OLED display in particular makes those flashes of neon feel transcendent, making every trick you pull off radiate through the darkness like divine graffiti. It's a skating game that might have a little bit more to say about the art of skating. The act of shredding here isn't rebellion against society, but against heaven itself. You're a demon commanded to skate through the underworld and consume the moon, and each line you carve across this vaporous landscape feels like a literal act of defiance. It's artful, strange, and maybe a little pretentious, but there's an earnestness to it. You can tell that the visual design, the shader work, and the tactile feel and movement have all been crafted with obsessive care. Whether it's weird for weird's sake or something genuinely profound, there's clearly intent behind the abstraction, one that a vertical slice for Nextfest can't quite capture entirely. Mechanically, Skate Story sits somewhere between Tony Hawk and Skate, less about chaining tricks for high scores, more about flow, rhythm, and momentum. Tricks are tools used to build speed, smash enemies, or simply punctuate a moment of movement with style. It's almost more of a platformer than a traditional skating sim then, reminiscent of Ollie Ollie, but presented from a moody, over-the-shoulder perspective. The goal isn't mastery of a skate park, but rather transcendence through motion. What excites me most though is seeing how far the full release can stretch this idea. The demo's obstacle courses already show promise. Their design relies on speed, precision, and managing your fragile frame. You'll need to power slide through sharp corners, carefully time ollies to clear gaps, and maintain momentum to avoid shattering. In a genre that's only recently rolled back into relevance, Skate Story stands out as something daringly different. Devolver's backing gives it the best possible chance to find its audience, and if the final game can make its mechanics sing as beautifully as its visuals already do, this could easily become one of the most memorable games of its kind. A skating game for the soul. From some of the biggest games to the smallest demo I tried during NextFest, this one actually came my way for a kind email from the developer themselves. Although simple on the surface, Flipside hooked me right away with its clever premise. It's a straightforward puzzle platformer. Run, jump, grab the key, avoid the spikes and saw blades, and reach the exit. But the twist, and it's quite literally a twist, lets you rotate the entire level 90 degrees at the press of a button, shifting gravity and everything within it, including your character. From there, the brain teasing begins as you juggle both spatial intuition and quick reflexes to dodge spikes, align jumps, and make clever use of momentum. It's a fun, surprisingly athletic spin on a usually methodical genre, and even in this early stage, the developer has mined plenty of interesting mechanics out of Flipside's unique selling points. Visually, I liked its minimalist charm. The art style uses a limited color palette and simple object detail reminiscent of the Game Boy era. It almost feels like you're tilting one of those old handhelds to change the scene inside, like shaking up a snow globe and watching the pieces resettle in real time. Everything stays crisp and legible. I never found myself wishing the text was clearer or that objects needed more explanation. And since failed puzzles reset instantly, frustration never really has time to build. It keeps that one more try momentum going strong. If there is one thing I missed, it's the ability to rotate levels in both directions. You can only turn them one way, rather than choosing clockwise or counter. Still, considering the puzzles are built around that constraint of every rotation moving the world in consistent steps, I get why that choice was made. It's a deliberate limitation that adds structure to the potential chaos. Flipside is definitely a slight demo, and compared to the other titles here, it lacks some of the polish and quality of life features you'd expect from a larger studio. But for a completely solo developed project, it's absolutely fine. It ran smoothly on Steam Deck, recognized my controller, even if it thought it was a PlayStation pad, and never crashed once. Right now, the demo only features 30 of the planned 150 levels, but it's a promising start. If you're open to smaller, experimental projects, or just like supporting first-time developers, I think Flipside is absolutely worth your time, and a great debut from Plaything. For another round of puzzling action, this time polished to a gleam, let's talk about Trimjob, perhaps the most unfortunately titled game in this whole lineup, but fittingly so because its presentation is just as bold as its name. To borrow the words of NoClip's Jesse Garasha, who recommended the game over on Blue Sky, Trimjob feels like a lost UFO 50 minigame that somehow got a full release. It's one of those gloriously strange ideas that sounds like a joke until you actually play it. Mini-golf meets lawn maintenance. Instead of putting a ball, you're launching a pair of flying shears through isometric garden courses, trying to clear as many hedges as possible in as few moves as you can. The shears slow over distance, picking up speed either by chomping through bushes or bouncing off power-ups, chilies that boost speed, and bananas that split your blade into multiple flying blades. It's clever stuff and so well executed that you can't believe no one's done it before. As for its presentation, well, I'm kind of obsessed with it. The menus are clean, the animation's bouncy, and the sound design ties it all together with the right kind of chaos. There's a setting for a desperate announcer, which at first I assumed was a gag, until I realised it literally means a sports commentator who screams catchphrases at you for every swing, collision, and hedge you trim.
Nice trim!
It's absurd and never really stopped being funny. Honestly, I kinda wish every game had it now.
Freeze! Sick!
It's a Windows-only release, and due to some technical difficulties, they had to run the demo through Crossover to capture this footage. Fortunately, being such a lightweight game, it ran absolutely fine, and I imagine no matter what system you're running, it will do likewise. Here's hoping Trimjob tees up a full 18 holes of hedge-cutting chaos soon, because if the demo's anything to go by, it's shaping up to be a real cut above. 3D platformers are a reliable staple of every Steam Next Fest. The genre is always good for a bit of nostalgic comfort food, a reminder of why we fell in love with games that let us run, jump, and collect shiny things. Considering some of my other picks so far, you'd be giving for expecting my next to be a polished throwback to the N64 era, but actually this one feels surprisingly modern and more forward-thinking than retro, because my top pick of the platformers this time is Big Hops. As the name implies, you play as a sweet little frog whose sticky tongue isn't just for show. It's his all-purpose gadget. You can use it to grab distant objects, swing from anchor points, or flick switches from across the map. He's a talkative, endearing little guy, and yeah, maybe using his tongue as a grappling hook feels a bit rude, but that's the price of being a platforming hero. The opening stretch sticks to familiar territory, light on enemies, heavy on bottomless pits and obstacle courses. But what really makes Big Hops leap beyond the usual 3D platform affair is how it quietly folds in a surprising layer of emergent design. After the release of Breath of the Wild in 2017, there was a lot of talk about how its open-ended systems like stamina-driven climbing, physical puzzles, and environmental interactions might ripple out across the industry. Because AAA development moves at a glacial pace, we haven't really seen the other studios take those lessons to heart just yet. Big Hops, on the other hand, has. There's a stamina bar that limits how long you can cling to walls, turning traversal into a skill test instead of a given. Even Frog's movement has some contextual interaction with the world, including a Titanfall-like wall run. But the world is also dotted with toys that encourage creativity. Throw mushrooms at the floor to create bouncy pads, lob acorns to grow climbable vines. These mechanics turn what could have been a straightforward platformer into a dynamic little sandbox. Part Super Mario 64, part Breath of the Wild, all charm. And just when you think you've seen it all, the game starts pulling off Mario Galaxy-style gravity shifts, spherical worlds, looping perspectives, the kind of stuff that makes you ask, wait, how did they pull that off? For what appears to be a small indie project, it's shockingly ambitious. The art style is crisp and confident, and the whole presentation feels way too polished for a free Next Fest demo. Performance-wise, I was pleasantly surprised too. Running on Steam Deck, the game held a steady 60 frames per second the whole time, and if you're on a more powerful machine, you can probably expect to see frame rates pushing past 100. If I had one minor critique, and this is more of a tonal nitpick than anything, the story setup feels a touch uneven. It starts out with light-hearted woodland whimsy, but a certain devilish entity that's going for cartoon antagonism comes off more menacing here. It's not bad, just slightly out of step with the game's otherwise bouncy energy. I imagine in the full version will all smooth out once the story gets room to breathe. Even so, Big Hops is an easy recommendation. Indie 3D platformers tend to lean hard on the legacy of the big names, chasing Mario's tight physics or Sonic's raw speed, but this one carves its own path. The frog's sticky tongue isn't just a gimmick, it's part of a clever, systemic toolkit that rewards experimentation. Combine that with the game's playful world building and surprising mechanical depth, and you got one of the most promising platformers I've seen this side of Next Fest. If this is what a modern mascot platformer looks like, then I'm all in. Before wrapping up, I want to spotlight another title that sits slightly outside my usual comfort zone, but impressed me so much I couldn't leave it out. Tears of Metal is a medieval hack and slash with a tactical twist, part battlefield brawler, part war commander. You play as a band of tenacious Scots defending their homeland from the demonic forces of the English invaders. Arguably one of the most metal premises for a game this year, and the experience lives up to it. I went in expecting a bit of jank. This genre doesn't often thrive in unity, but Tears of Metal surprised me with just how weighty and satisfying its combat feels. It's not the over-the-top, crowd-clearing spectacle of Dynasty Warriors, instead it's tighter, meaner, and more personal. The focus is on precision duels and small skirmishes with just enough tactical depth to make every swing matter. You got a solid arsenal of moves to work with, a dash, a quick slash, a heavier attack, and most intriguingly, the ability to command your soldiers. You can order them to charge forward or unleash volleys of arrows, tilting the odds in your favour when things get tense. You don't have full control over your troops, however, they're comrades, not pawns, but that's part of the appeal. You're not some omnipotent general, you're in the mud with them, fighting shoulder to shoulder. It's tough, punishing even, but in that roguelike way that rewards perseverance. Each loss teaches you something, and with every run you come back a little sharper and stronger. Visually, Tears of Metal nails its tone. The painterly textures give the world a rough, expressive quality, detailed enough to feel alive without ever getting cluttered. Thick fog rolls across the highlands, flattening distant mountains into moody silhouettes, and when the blood starts flying, it really flies. Every encounter ends with the battlefield drenched in crimson, a striking contrast against the muted greens and greys of the Scottish moors. Structurally, it skirts the edges of the roguelike genre. You progress across a war map, each node representing a battle or encounter, with a mix of randomized events and persistent upgrades between runs. When you fall, you're sent back to your base to rebuild, unlocking new soldiers, buffs, and strategies before heading out again. It's less about micromanagement and more about momentum, the feeling of clawing your way through a long, attritional campaign. The presentation ties it all together beautifully. The 3D models have a bold, cel-shaded comic book style, and the UI carries that same hand-drawn energy. Though I do wish the interface text was a little larger, especially on the Steam Deck's smaller screen. During heated battles, it's easy to lose track of meters and cooldowns, but the overall look and feel more than makes up for it. Tears of Metal might not be the kind of game I usually excel at, but it's one I can't stop thinking about. It's brutal, confident, and full of personality, a medieval fever dream that turns its rough edges into part of its identity. If you're craving something that blends brawling and battlefield tactics with a healthy dose of Scottish rage, then this one's worth keeping an eye on. Finally, I want to close out with a pick that fills a gap this roundup hasn't quite hit yet, a fast, blood-pumping action game that runs beautifully on Mac. Like a few other games I've covered, it's clearly inspired by the past, in this case the twitchy, hyper-violent design of Hotline Miami. But if that game was soaked in the neon excess of the late 80s, Jackal rewinds the clock a decade earlier, relocated to the smoky, sweat-stained 1970s, where literal Egyptian gods of death are your partners in crime. Story-wise, Jackal is more impressionistic than coherent, told through bursts of kinetic text, wobbly 3D models, and snarled one-liners from its chain-smoking gravel-voiced protagonist. Each level is a room-clearing rampage through well-dressed goons and seedy nightclubs. While Hotline Miami felt like a surgical massacre, Jackal is pure, messy instinct. You don't glide through rooms like a hitman, you stumble, slide, and bleed your way to the finish line. It's less professional killer, more possessed blunt instrument, and that slightly sloppy energy actually makes it feel more human. Or maybe I'm just bad at it, but either way it works. There's no shortage of ways to wreak havoc. You can kick doors off their hinges and knock enemies out cold with the debris, slide into them for a takedown, or grab whatever melee weapons lying around to slash or throw. Firearms exist, but ammo's scarce. A quick burst of stopping power before you're back to improvising. Each encounter feels like a grim kinetic puzzle solved through momentum and adrenaline, rather than precision. Visually and sonically, Jackal nails the aesthetic. The shift to full 3D doesn't cost it any of Hotline's intensity, and instead, it adds this great diorama-like depth, as if you're gazing into a particularly violent doll's house. You can peek through around corners to scout enemies, read the room's geometry, and plan a few moves ahead. Layered on top are your divine powers, summoning the wrath of the gods to curse foes with madness, turning them against each other, or teleporting across the map for a surprise strike. You're not just a killer then, but a Grim Reaper with rhythm, moving through carnage like it's choreography. With no Hotline Miami 3 in sight then, Jackal might be the next best thing. It's stylish, chaotic, and just mysterious enough to leave you wanting more. A slick descent into divine ultraviolence, and one hell of a note to end on. And that just about wraps up my picks from October 2025 Steam Next Fest. I'll be honest, it's getting hard to dig through the noise these days, especially with so many half-baked AI-generated projects flooding the storefront. But even with all that clutter, there's still plenty of gold buried on Steam to be discovered, and these were just a handful of the demos that really stood out to me, even if one of them was also a full release. Before we go though, a few rapid-fire shout-outs I didn't quite have enough time to dive into. Monsters Are Coming, Rock'n' Road, a clever spin on the Vampire Survivors formula where you're not the lone hero but the escort for an entire moving town. You expand its defenses and carve a safe path ahead, clearing debris and monsters alike as the settlement rolls forward. It's a cool twist on strategy, especially if you're into the recently released Ball Pit. Earth Must Die, the latest from Size 5 Games, the folks behind Ben There, Dan That, and Lara the Clockwork God. It looks fantastic, it's very funny, and it carries that same scrappy British wit and personality that makes all their games special. If you've never checked out their work, this is a perfect place to start. And finally, Demio X Dungeons & Dragons Battle Marks, another one that landed directly in my inbox, and a surprisingly big deal considering its official D&D tie-in. What sold me though wasn't the license, but the feel of it, the way its chunky pieces and turn-based tactics evoke the joy of playing with real miniatures. It's got that XCOM style strategy, but with a tabletop heart. Basically, it's like having hundreds of pounds worth of figurines and terrain without having to lug them out of the cupboard. But now it's your turn. What caught your eye this Next Fest? Were there any hidden gems I missed or demos you think deserve more love? Drop your recommendations in the comments below. Until next time, I'm James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.